All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the DMZ's Fireside Chat with Real Ventures and Peekapak. I'd like to start by saying thank you to everyone for joining us for the next hour or so as we dive into the Canadian tech ecosystem. To those of you who I haven't had the chance of meeting yet, my name is Abdullah Snobar. I'm the Executive Director at the DMZ and also the CEO of DMZ Ventures. Today's session was designed to provide us with a pulse on what's going on in the startup and innovation community, both in Toronto and across the country, with two very special guests who I'll have the privilege of introducing in just a minute. We're going to take a look at how the landscape has evolved over the past 10 years, industry trends we're seeing today, and where Canada has an opportunity to level up. And of course, how founders can navigate the current funding environment, which I know is a top of mind question for most. Before we dive into it, I'd like to take the chance, let the audience know that we have probably about 5 or 10 minutes scheduled for Q&A at the end of the session. So you'll have the chance to ask your questions and to the esteemed guests. So please make sure that you just push those questions to the Q&A function on Zoom. So hold off until then, but feel free to ask throughout, and we'll keep note of those questions. And with that, I am delighted to introduce to you our panelists today. A close friend of the DMZ, Janet Bannister, is a partner at Real Ventures, a leading source of capital for entrepreneurs who are building the next generation of leading tech companies. Janet has led investments in over a dozen companies and works actively with founders to help them build large industry-defining companies. Next, we have Amy Shah. Amy is the co-founder and CEO of Peekapak, an award-winning social emotional learning platform that engages K-12 students to learn skills to support their well-being and mental health. Peekapak has reached over 750,000 educators and students in over 90 countries, actually 90 plus countries, and is a proud DMZ alumni company. They took part in the DMZ incubator program back in 2017. So please help me in welcoming both Janet and Amy to the virtual stage. Welcome to you both.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Thank you. All right, let's dive right into it then. So, well, while the ecosystem is experiencing economic uncertainty, and you can't talk about on any panel these days without getting into this very kind of area. Toronto and Canada at large have seen exponential growth this past decade. The number of startups, VC investors, and global tech giants calling Canada home. This includes the DoorDashes, the Pinterests, the Reddits, and all this has continued to skyrocket. Janet, I'd love to get your take on the ecosystem today and how it compares to where it was, say, 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is, not surprisingly, much larger. And just to share some facts, the number of tech companies in the Toronto-Waterloo area has grown 10x over the past 8 years. For the last several years, the Toronto-Waterloo area has created more new tech jobs than Silicon Valley, Seattle, New York, and DC combined. So, and I could go on. It has the second highest density of startups in the world and the highest concentration of AI startups anywhere in the world. So, Toronto, Waterloo area, definitely a very strong area for startups. Rest of Canada as well is doing super well. But Toronto was also ranked 2 times recently as the best overall North American ecosystem in which to build a tech company by a third party.
Amazing. And what do you think a lot of these multinationals are looking to Canada for? Is it beyond the talent? Is it our maple syrup? Is it the kindness of the people? Is it the stability of our I can't even say stability of our economy because things are quite unstable right now. But what do you think people are kind of attracted to?
I think it's our snow and the cold winters. I think that's driving people here from California. No, seriously, I think it's all of those. I talked to a lot of companies. So with the stats I was talking about were all about around, except for the tech jobs, right? But you know, the number of tech companies has grown 10x over the past 8 years. That's really about Canadian startups. But to your point, absolutely, there are a lot of companies that have opened offices in Canada and specifically Toronto over the last few years, such as, you know, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Uber, Twitter, Amazon, all now have AI specifically focused offices in Canada. And I think it is the talent is the number one thing. And I would group that talent in 2 buckets. One is, you know, what I call homegrown talent. So the talent that exists here. And the second is the immigrant talent or newcomer talent. And so companies like the fact that Canada is a very immigrant-friendly country, and they know that, hey, we can open an office in Canada, and when we want to recruit people anywhere around the world, we can easily, or relatively easily, get them into Canada, certainly a lot easier than into the US.
Got it. Really good points there, Janet. Amy, any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we first got started, we actually went to Silicon Valley, and I think part of the mindset was like, we needed to go there. We need to be part of this accelerator program. And we thought, oh, I'm going to go get my visa. I'm going to move over there. And then I remember coming back and, you know, taking kind of some time to apply for my visa. And I ended up joining the DMZ, and I started really getting plugged into the ecosystem and understanding more what Toronto had to offer. And even just doing the comparison of like, the access to talent, but also just more affordable, you know, fantastic talent, being able to access, you know, government, you know, funding and opportunities here, or even just like the peer-to-peer networking and just the excitement that was happening in the Toronto ecosystem. And so we ended up deciding, no, you know, we don't need to be in Silicon Valley. Like Toronto is such a thriving ecosystem. And the DMZ, I have to give a lot of credit. That was like part of the reason why we decided to really want to stay here and be based in Toronto. So I think it's, you know, early on, we've seen that change. And I think it's just gone better and better year over year. I'm just always impressed with the amount of the caliber of our startups and the companies that are coming out of our region.
You speak a lot of truth because, you know, DMZ has been around for almost 13 years. I haven't been at the DMZ for that long, but, you know, I'll never forget early days, I saw the DMZ kind of starting up, and, you know, it was one of the very few in the ecosystem, if I can say that. And there wasn't many others playing a significant part. There wasn't as much of a startup culture within the city. And I think that within a decade, things really took a turn for the better. And you've seen so much growth, so much change happen. And even, and Jenna, you probably see a lot of this as well. As people were establishing and building their companies and their startups, one of the thoughts that Amy just spoke to was that in order to make it and make it big, you had to go south. And I think you're seeing a lot of a shift away from that. And it doesn't mean that people don't expand. They have to expand because Canada is such a small market. But the general kind of consensus is now, instead of relocating your shop, you can expand your operation into New York, into San Francisco, into Texas or Austin, whatever it is. But it doesn't mean that you have to leave your base in Canada, right? So it's really become a lot more popular and a lot more normalized that Canada is a very good place to be and build and grow and scale as you kind of embark on your startup adventure.
Yeah, I would say being located in Canada, through the eyes of a Silicon Valley based investor, being located in Canada has gone from being a liability to being an asset. And,
True.
you know, US firms love to invest in Canadian companies. And it's amazing how often I speak with US investors, either who I already know or who reach out to me cold and say, hey, Janet, we want to do more investing in Canada. We love the type of companies that are there. We love the entrepreneurs who are there. We love the quality of the talent, and we want to do more. And I would say, you know, why is that? Yes, it's the technical talent, but what they also find is it's a different attitude in Canada. The companies, and this part is particularly relevant today, tend to do more with less money. And it's not just because our costs are lower, it's because the mentality is different. And versus in Silicon Valley, historically, you know, the mindset has been, hey, you go as fast, as grow as fast as you can. You throw money at the problem, you go, go, go. And Canadian companies, again, generally, it's a generalization, generally, they're just as ambitious. They want to build those huge companies, but they're more mindful in terms of what is the return on this investment. You know, they know that if they don't show the metrics, their next round of funding is not going to be there. And therefore they tend to build more long-term durable companies, particularly in an environment like this.
Very true. Look, I think the three of us are all very pro Canadian here, and I think it's clear that Canada has really made a name for itself on the global stage. And a big reason for it is obviously our talent. And Janet, you've spoken to this already quite a bit. You know, Canadian cities continue to produce and attract some of the best and brightest tech talent in the world, which, you know, gives us a pretty significant competitive advantage. Vancouver and Toronto recorded faster tech job growth in 2020 and 2021 than any other cities in North America, which is crazy. So Vancouver's pool of tech jobs increased by more than 44%, while Toronto's grew by over 37%, outpacing Austin, Texas, and even Seattle. So, and actually Waterloo and Ottawa and Calgary, we haven't talked about Ottawa and Calgary as much, but they're also among the next 10 tech talent markets to watch for across North America as well, which is really exciting because generally speaking, whenever we talk about innovation across this nation, it always, you know, comes back to Toronto, Waterloo. So I think now being able to incorporate Vancouver, Calgary, Ottawa, even I'd say, you know, places in like Halifax have come a long way in building some significant progress towards becoming bigger and bigger players. So I kind of asked this question, but I want to just double down on it because I think the people on the call are also trying to understand what is the differentiating factors to build in Canada and be in Canada. So while talent is a big differentiating factor that gives our innovation ecosystem, I call it a leg up, what other elements sets us apart from, again, I'm not going to say the States only, but the States, from Europe, from different parts, and makes Toronto, makes Ontario, makes Canada the place to be? Maybe Amy, why don't we start with you this time? I'd love to hear more about, you know, what strengths you've seen that work to Peekapak's advantage.
Yeah, definitely. Like I mentioned, like being part of like incubators or innovation kind of systems like the DMZ, but others, you know, we were part of Communitech. I think we've, you know, participated in other kinds of, I was just actually coming back from the CWNs. They have a BIPOC, you know, showcase of new companies and companies that are growing. These are, you know, supports that I think help different segments of startup founders really be able to connect to get the right kind of mentorship. So be able to get the kind of support to, you know, learn about sales, for example. The incubator at the DMZ was all about sales. And that was like our big kind of piece of learning that we needed to kind of get to the next stage. Or being able to do peer-to-peer. So I was part of a founder forum, and I think just the strength of the candidness of the Canadian founders and being able to learn from each other was, you know, very, you know, often being a founder is isolating, and being able to turn to others, I think that was really helpful. And I found the Canadian mentality was, you know, very candid and very open to sharing. And I know at the DMZ, there was a founder group, a peer-to-peer kind of founder group that I always looked forward to going to because I learned so much. And like, I know folks would come in and share their templates and their emails and everything. And like, that's, you know, sometimes I think there's some posturing when you go to the States. And I think, you know, depending on the communities, definitely you get that candidness too. But I do find in Canada, there is a lot of openness to help each other out amongst the founder community. And so that's been helpful. And then I think there's also just been lots of great government or different kind of awards and programs to provide support to, again, targeted groups of types of founders. So be it a female founder or, you know, someone of color or you know, being able to get the kind of support that you need. I think that's also there. We've taken advantage of a lot of hiring grants and opportunities to support different communities as well. Like, you know, for example, new co-ops and interns. And that I know whenever we speak to our Canadian or in US investors, they're like, wow, there's so much non-dilutive funding in Canada. Like if you know where to find it, it can really help build your business as well on top of, private investment. So I think there's a lot of great advantages in the Canadian ecosystem.
It's such a good point. And, just for some of the newcomers on the call that, when we talk about sharing notes and best practices and call it standards, it's not considered plagiarism. So it's okay. And it's actually welcomed in the work that we do. But I think also one of the things that you had kind of working in your advantage, Amy, was the fact that you're in the edtech space, which is, I think is a huge benefit being in Canada as well, and kind of being able to leverage the kind of the community here, and the fact that we have such a rich public education system as well, kind of maybe gets people more excited about the idea of being able to leverage such technologies like yours.
Yeah, I mean, when the pandemic hit, I think what's exciting is that everyone all of a sudden did want to take advantage of the technology. And I feel like it's trained all our educators and everyone, all parents as well, in terms of using technology to support education. But we've been so fortunate that a lot of local partners have said, come into our classroom, be able to research with the local students or teachers and give us really strong feedback about how we can kind of grow and develop our solutions. So I think that's, 10 years ago, I don't think I saw that as much, but now I'm seeing more and more where there's that openness and that idea of like open innovation to kind of support the development of what we're doing as well. Very
cool. Janet, maybe I can kind of bring it back over to you, and maybe I could even just twist it a bit because Amy spoke to this. Is what's setting us apart and giving us the leg up post-pandemic, like for Canada? Like, what is it that people should be really looking into the country here for that would set us apart because of the fact that we've kind of come out of this shift. The digital economy has kind of grown and moved at a much faster pace than we've ever imagined. So someone that wants to build scale and grow a business in Canada, why, beyond the talent, like why should they pick the Maple Leaf as home?
Yeah, I mean, I think beyond the talent, I would say two other things. And number one is easy access to the US market. So what I have seen, and folks on the call may have seen, is people are getting back to in person, and increasingly from a sales standpoint, customers, they're making customer calls again. And the fact that Canada is located next to the world's largest economy across the friendliest border, really, I mean, if you're selling into it, it's got a common language, it's very easy. And so if you are building, if you're building a B2B software company, for instance, you probably want to be selling into the US market and probably want to be doing that sooner rather than later. And so I would argue the best market to do that, to sell into the US from outside of the US is Canada. So I think that's not number one, thinking about the global basis, not to mention the fact that, hey, Canada is, it's a stable government, stable currency. So, again, thinking on relative to other places around the world, you might want to build a business. So I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is, and Amy touched on this, but I would characterize it as, and we talked about the growth of Canada, but it's a flywheel of success. And I think that in ecosystems, what we have seen repeatedly is it's like, there is that positive network effect where the strong ecosystems get stronger, right? That's why Silicon Valley has remained such a hotbed of startups for so many years. It's because if a market gets hot in terms of, hey, this is a great place to build a business, then talent goes there, and then more business and people who live there are more likely to start a business, and then more capital comes in, and then that produces repeat founders, and then it just keeps going. And for a long time, I think, Canada just didn't have that cycle going. And then through some of the things that Amy talked about, we've been able to kickstart that, and we're seeing more and more successful companies. And yes, things are slowing down, etc. But that's part of the cycle. And, I think that the permanence of Canada has now shifted. I know, for instance, when we're looking at investments, if you look at our investments that we have made over the last few years, 70% of our founders are repeat founders. 10 years ago, that was less than 30%. So, so that gives you an idea. I will put a little asterisk on there just so it's not misunderstood that I actually am a huge believer in first-time founders. So if you're a first-time founder here and listening to this, don't think that I'm trying to say, hey, second-time founders are necessarily better, because a lot of our best performing companies were started by first-time founders, love first-time founders, for a whole bunch of specific reasons relative to early stage, relative to first founders. But I think all that being said, it does show a maturity in the ecosystem when you have people coming around, whether that be founders or whether that be a head of sales or a CTO or whoever, who can come in and say, you know, I have taken another company or two other companies from 2 engineers to 100 engineers, and I know that playbook and how we can do it in this company.
Awesome. I think we've talked a lot about the really good stuff. I want to kind of get into some of the challenging stuff a little bit on the same theme, talent. I'm not going to leave that one just yet. And I think one thing we always have to mention is that, you know, being in Canada right now, you get, you know, if you're bringing in American currency, you're going to get a pretty good discount on whatever you're actually getting here, which I hate to say it's a benefit, but it is a benefit for a lot of people, especially the investors as they're kind of looking at things. But from an investor perspective, from a founder perspective, talent. Here's what I'm hearing the most. Abdullah, we're having a really hard time hiring. Everybody says there's so much talent and we're generating all this talent and all this talent is coming out and this and that and the other, but where the heck are they? I can't find them. I can't hire them. I can't afford them. Or if I find them, I'm then kind of competing against the Amazons or the Shopifys, because just to keep it more Canadian, of the worlds. You know, Amy, let me just kind of start with you. What are strategies that you're actually using to be able to bring on good talent to join Peekapak? And what's some guidance that you kind of give yourself or even those around you from a peer network to be able to bring on good people to build and grow the business?
Yeah, good question. Definitely noticed how competitive it got over the last few years. And I think where we have, you know, shifted kind of our thinking is, we ended up going to be 100% remote post-pandemic. And so that allowed us to really open up our mindset that we don't need to hire just in Toronto, that we can actually hire across the country. So we've hired now in BC and Alberta and Halifax. So we're across the country, across, you know, Ontario as well. And that's allowed us to be able to get a talent at a rate that we can afford as well. We're not just hiring in Toronto where cost of living is a lot more expensive. And we've also, I think, have been really open and eager to hire newcomers who do have the right kind of skill set, but, you know, often may have challenges getting traditional jobs. And so we're almost like a stepping stone for them, but we want them to grow with us at the end of the day, because they're coming in with lots of great skill sets, degrees, past experience. And so if I think of the last 5 hires we've done, 3 out of the 5 were newcomers, and, you know, have been fantastic assets to our team and have helped us kind of grow and build out different functional experiences. So I think for us, we've been really thinking open-mindedly, like how, you know, what are the right kind of skill sets? How can we look beyond just the Toronto market? Because we are, you know, we could be, you know, essentially global, but we are really focused on Canada, but the Canadian market, and really be able to grow that way in an effective and, you know, affordable way. Cool.
Janet, what are you telling your portfolio companies and even other companies? I know that we can't become like anti-large tech companies here because they're still creating a lot of, you know, economic benefit for the country, but how do you compete? Like, what do you do? What kind of advice are you giving?
Well, I would say first and foremost, it's a lot easier now than it was a year ago.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I mean, so I haven't heard recently companies commenting that it's really hard to find engineers. What I am actually hearing and what I'm seeing in some of our companies is they're saying, you know what, actually, this is an opportunity now for us to upskill some of our talent and the technical talent in terms of, you know, getting some stronger people in who maybe were let go or are still part of some of these companies, but they're more likely to leave now because they've lost a lot of their colleagues or they're not sure about the future of the company. So I would say that. I think, though, a couple of things. First of all, in terms of the talent, I would divide it into 2 categories. One is sort of technical talent and the other is managerial scaling talent. For both, in terms of the value, you've got to make sure that you sell people on the value proposition of, hey, you can be part of this company. It's going to be great. It's going to be exciting.
Yep.
You know, if they're early stage in their career, awesome learning opportunity. You know, if you're doing something, you know, hopefully folks on the team will be bought into the vision and what the company is trying to achieve. So I think you need to go with that. I'm always wary about sort of saying, hey, let's pay an extra, X dollars to try to get this person, because then the next time the next company is going to come along and offer an additional X, and you get into this, and you don't really want to get into that game. So hopefully you can, yes, you need to pay competitively, but you need to sell the whole package. But getting back to that division, in terms of what I am seeing right now, is there's much more technical talent available. I haven't heard any companies commenting over the last 6 months that they can't hire technical talent, although it probably is. I just haven't heard it. But probably for some very specific technical roles, I'm sure it's still hard to find people. Where I think has always been a challenge is more on the leading senior roles in functional areas. So what I'm talking about is, for instance, a head of sales, head of product, head of HR has become a very difficult position to hire. So because a lot of times you're looking for those roles is people who have done it before in terms of scaling a company, right? Like, okay, hey, I want a CTO, as I mentioned before, who's taken an organization from 2 to 100 engineers. I'd like an HR person who has, again, scaled a company from 20 people to 100 and 200 people and knows what systems you need to put in place in various spots, same with sales, etc. And it requires a very unique skill set and a very unique individual to go into those roles. And those are the roles where in Canada, we just don't have that depth because we haven't had as many scale-ups. Again, talking about sort of that flywheel effect that I talked about before, it's definitely picking up and there are more, but we do not have the depth. And those are the types of roles where I've seen our companies are still struggling to hire people. A lot of times in those cases, they are hiring remotely now, just again, because because you can, and B, because it's really tough to find those people. In Toronto, it's just always tough to find them. And so that's what I'm seeing is those roles are being, they're opening up to be, they're opening up to say, hey, we'll hire these roles anywhere across North America.
Love it. We're going to talk about remote areas in a second, but I love that because as a founder, you got to sell the dream.
Yes.
You got to be able to get people to understand the why game really strongly. Like, why are we here? Why are we doing what we do? And what's the ultimate goal? And then you got to get people to really buy into the fact that there's light at the end of the tunnel, which means that there is a huge benefit that you can gain bigger than what, let's call it like your salary will be down the line the next 3, 4, 5 years. And
Yes.
if people believe in it and they're going to be along the ride, then there's going to be a huge benefit. Now, again, life is a risk and you take the risk, and it can either work your way or it can work the other way as well. And you got to just, if you're truly bought into it, then that's the first piece to hopefully to a recipe towards success. So
yeah,
on your points, looking at Canada's ecosystem at large, what are there industries or cities that either of you are particularly invested in or are optimistic about in terms of their trajectory on impact and innovation? And maybe Janet, we can start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm excited right across the country. I think, Toronto is where I live and spend most of my time, but I am interested in, I think anywhere in the West, seeing some really interesting things happening, whether that be in Winnipeg or Calgary or Vancouver. More and more companies are coming there. And again, the move to remote work enables companies to have head offices really anywhere and employ and hire people from across North America or even around the world. I think what was interesting to me, so I do Creative Destruction Lab, I've been a mentor. And as I do Creative Destruction Lab across different cities, what struck me the first time I went to Vancouver and met all the companies there, and then to the East Coast, was how different the companies are in each city. Like, I was struck when I went to Vancouver and I met these companies, how many were in the natural resource business. And I thought, oh, wow, like here I am for a day and I've just seen 10 companies in the natural resource industry. I spent like 5 years in Toronto and I've never seen one of these. Like I'm talking, for instance, a company in the lumber, or you go to Alberta, there's lots of oil and gas. There's lots of ocean tech companies on both coasts. And so that's really interesting to, and a lot more agriculture in the prairie provinces. And so I think that's really interesting, to see the regional differences.
Love it. Awesome. Amy?
I mean, I'm biased to ed tech, but I'm excited. I think there's a lot of opportunity and growth in that space. And obviously, we, having Canada as a base, but then the US is such a big market. I think it's definitely, like we said, Janet was saying earlier, has been such an advantage, and there's been so much growth there in that space. But beyond, ed tech and that being obvious, but I think the social impact kind of space has been interesting in Canada. I think there's been a lot of growth and kind of development in that investing and measurement and understanding of that space. And so I think, for founders who are doing something that is mission oriented, or, be it in the environmental impact or climate change or social good, I think there's just been a lot more focus and energy and interest there. So I think it's great to see that and kind of the investments in that space to kind of make a difference longer term.
Love it. I'm cognizant of time, so I have more questions, but I want to just shift into one of the probably the most important topics that we've been asked to speak about today, which is fundraising. So again, it's no surprise here. So let's get right into that, an area that both of you are very familiar with. So, look, it's not a secret that raising capital this past year has proven to be quite difficult for startups. And so far this year, Toronto startups have raised less than half of total capital raised in 2021. So while there is still a ton of factors that need to be considered, let's talk about, like, there's inflation, economic uncertainty, lower consumer and business confidence, and higher interest rates. The resilience the ecosystem has created through the pandemic is immeasurable. We have a ton of founders joining us today who are hungry for lessons learned and best practices when it comes to securing funding. Amy, as the CEO and co-founder of Peekapak, you've secured various types of funding. You spoke about it earlier, whether it was including, whether it was the private investment, awards, grants, tax credits, and leading your company to wild growth and success over the years. You've been able to leverage a lot of these things to help in doing so. What advice do you have to share with founders on the line today who are planning on securing funds or trying to secure funds? Any insights that you can maybe speak to on how they can find the right investor at the right time for their business?
Yeah, definitely. It's things have changed a lot in the last year for sure. So when I was thinking about funding for us, different stages of the company, it really, we had to think about where we were at as a company, how developed were we? Did we have product market fit? What traction we had? And what the needs were, is this like the right time for us to have an inflection point? Do we want to invest more into A, B, and C, whatever it is? And so I think for us, like at different stages, we've kind of looked at, okay, for example, early on, we were able to really find mission-oriented, aligned investors through the different networks that we were a part of that wanted to invest in Peekapak because they were aligned to that vision. They had ed tech, or impact kind of experience. They wanted to really be part of that journey with us. And I think likewise, as we think about growth, I think we need to make sure that, if we're, for example, if we wanted to raise, VC funding, you're going to need to be able to show a certain amount of traction or a certain amount of kind of development in your product. And so I do think that it kind of comes down to where you are as a company. It's like, if there's no one cookie cutter kind of, piece of advice on this. I think each company needs to work, lean on their mentors, their advisors, their current investors to say, okay, where are we at as a business? What really makes sense for us? Are we attractive for investment? And, or are there other types of funding sources? As I mentioned, could you go after debt? Could you go after grants to basically get to the next stage or that next milestone to then be able to raise funding? So I think that's been kind of part of our kind of thinking when we look at fundraising. We also knew early on, if I'm sure some of the founders here today are maybe early in their journey. For us, what we learned and got a lot of advice on is, when you're kind of early in your journey, a lot of what you're selling is yourself as a founder, and the passion, the dedication, the confidence that you're going to stick through it and really build a business, that you're not going to die as a company and that you're going to grow it. And so I think a lot of our early investors met with us, and it was less of a formal pitch and more of a conversation, and really understanding, what our motivations were and how we're going to really build this business. But they were really betting on the founders and the early employees to really say, we're going to take this to the next stage. And so I do think that making sure that you kind of understand, depending on the stage of the business you're at, like, what are you selling? Are you selling you as founders? Are you selling, your product market fit and kind of the traction you're getting, or is it really scaling and growth and the type of investors there? So I think that's kind of been some of our mentality for us. And I think over the year, kind of supplemented with, be it private investment, as I mentioned, or other funding sources.
That's awesome. That's a really cool way to kind of frame it. And I think the dream definitely always starts with the founders, Amy. So I think you are part of that dream storytelling narrative that needs to be told when you're trying to either get funding or even trying to bring on talent to the table as well. And then I love the fact that you said that you need to diversify, what kind of funding you look for at what stage, at what time, based on the market, based on the conditions, based on your situation as a business as well. So all really, really good points. Janet, from a VC perspective, maybe I can kind of come back to you on this one. How should founders approach navigating the changing conditions of today's investment landscape, and based on what you've seen and how they can be most successful?
Yeah. So I'll say one thing about founders, and then two things related to how to be successful in this environment.
Okay.
One thing is in terms of founders. So the good news is that what we often see is that some of the strongest companies are born during economic downturns. And the reason is because they need to be gritty, right? It's the same reason why, going through hardship creates more resilience. And I think that is definitely true. So anyways, I could say more on that, but I'll move on in the interest of time. And then in terms of sort of, the impact of the current economic environment, I look at it through two lenses. One is in terms of, as you think about the impact on your business, one is the impact on your sales, and the other is impact on your funding. So first of all, in terms of your sales, what is the impact on your sales? Like, is our sales cycle going to be longer, et cetera? Or is this a well-positioned business in this economic environment? Because that ties into point number two in terms of funding. So if you are going out to funding, if you can make the case that your business is going to do particularly well in this difficult time, then that's a good thing, and you should make that case. And what are examples of that? So anything that can help a company, for instance, generate sales at a lower cost or be more efficient in their operations, save costs significantly and quickly, is a type of value proposition that, first of all, you'll be more successful. Secondly, investors will say, oh yeah, I understand why this company is going to be successful in the next couple of years, whereas some other companies aren't going to be successful. So that's one thing. You want to make sure you're showing your investors. I think the other thing in terms of what investors are looking for, the days of when investors only cared about growth are gone, and at least gone for now. Who knows when they'll come around again? I'm sure they will, given the way things go. But right now, the important things that you want to communicate to your investors are your unit economics. And what I mean by that is, how much does it cost to make each unit, like how much does it cost to make a sale, and how much revenue do you get from it? So what is your cost of customer acquisition and the value of the customers? What is your runway? Like, if you do this round, be able to show ideally, hey, I'm going to raise this money now, and this will enable me to grow. It will enable me to reach profitability if I can't raise a subsequent round. Or if I can raise a round in the future, that'll be great, because then it will just enable me to further accelerate our growth. So that's always a good thing to be able to show. And then figure out who is investing. I think that, and what I mean by that is, sometimes as founders, you're great, you're energetic, you're enthusiastic, and you're like, I want to go out and meet with investors, and every investor that I can meet with, that's awesome. And I would say you are super busy. do not take a meeting with an investor until you make sure, ideally, that they are willing to, that they are able to write a check. And if they're not, then that's a wasted hour. And so you should, hey, maybe you can talk to them for 15 minutes and tell them what you're doing, or send them an email and ask them to refer you to somebody else who's writing a check. But find out, what I would suggest is find out which funds have recently raised rounds, and talk around and ask around and say, okay, who are the investors who are writing checks now, both because they have the funding and they have the appetite, and spend your time with those folks. I think so I'll just say that.
I think really, look, you hear a lot of advice usually, Janet, you don't usually hear it like that. So sometimes they say, don't take a meeting with an investor unless you know exactly what you're asking them for, because you only get one shot. What you're saying is, make sure this investor is actually a proper investor writing checks. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. And your time as a founder is too delicate. And honestly, the runway is sometimes so small that you can't be distracted. And if you're going to find these opportunities, find them with the right people. So I love that. Love that message. It's a really good message. Not to, I think it's important for the people on the call, and even any, whether they're from the newcomer program or from DMZ General or anywhere, people are building a business. I think the word that you used as well, Janet, grit, is such an important thing to think of now as you're establishing and building a business, and not to lose sight of why you're doing something. And if you truly believe that what you're building will support, will solve for a real problem, it's working towards greatness, and it's actually has a proper market that's going to be able to leverage from what you're doing, then continue on. Don't worry about words like overvaluations, dry powder, down rounds, which everybody's been talking about. Don't worry about that. Just continue on. Especially people on this call are a much earlier phase right now as well. So don't be intimidated by things that maybe are out of your control, and focus on what you can do and build towards doing the right thing and being focused. And I think quality and focus will always work in your way here as well. Before I get into Q&A, I wanted to go back to the two of you and say, I was going to ask, what advice would you give on negotiating with rounds and everything else? But I actually wanted to say, what words of wisdom do you have, or that you want to share with the audience today? That could be anything, whether it's around fundraising, or whether it's around talent, or whether it's around kind of building in uncertain times. Anything that you guys can leave off with before we get into the Q&A. And maybe, Amy, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think more than ever, we've been leaning on kind of our advisors, our mentors, to kind of navigate this space. I think not even just having one perspective, but multiple perspectives of what should we be thinking about as we grow? For example, making sure we have obviously enough runway, but are there other things to navigate the uncertainty in the market? How do we look at our story and our narrative as we connect with, be it investors or partners or even sales? But think a lot has changed in the last couple of years, and I think sometimes that storytelling in terms of how we're connecting with folks, or how we're, like Janet mentioned, how we're analyzing the data and showcasing those unit economics. I think there's lots of things that different ways that we can look at our businesses, and ways that we can kind of think about growth over the next bit. But we're finding that more than ever, because there's such a change in the market and change in everything that's happened and how we run our businesses, we've had to lean more and more on folks within our community. And I think, if anything, I noticed, unfortunately with myself, I think the pandemic made me a little more, insular and, isolated. I didn't have the benefit of being in the DMZ anymore, and, quickly just bumping into a founder. And so I do think it's making that effort to really connect with different folks in the community and be able to get those perspectives has been helpful. But I also love what Janet said in terms of using your time so wisely and making sure that you're focused on where you're going to get the most, alignment in terms of, be it an investor who's actually investing, or a mentor who's really aligned to what your business is doing and how it's going to grow into that next stage.
Amazing. And Amy, let me tell you this, you're always welcome back in the DMZ. So if you ever feel that you want to bump into people and have those coffee, the coffee chats and whatnot, this is your home, 100%.
I'll need to come by. I miss it.
Janet?
So I would say, two sort of things connected. First of all, because I know there are a lot of newcomers on the call, that newcomers may be aware of these stats, but 57% of STEM workers in Silicon Valley were born outside of the US, and 50% of the largest US tech companies were funded by first-generation immigrants. So, you know, I love what DMZ is doing across all its programs, but particularly the newcomer program. So if you're a newcomer on this call, you're going to be like, I'm cheering for you. And I think then the second sort of general thing that I would say in terms of navigating these times and how to think about it is, you know, you may have, and I'll tell a little bit of a story, but people may have heard of something called the PayPal Mafia, right? Which is what they call, right? It's these folks who worked at PayPal in the early days of PayPal, and so many have gone on to do amazing things, such as Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn. I can't remember all the other ones off the top. Anyways, a whole bunch of them. You just, you know, Google PayPal Mafia, and you'll see the whole list of companies that they went on to found. These were, you know, young people, first-time businesses starting the company together. And, you know, what's interesting is at that time, I was working at eBay in Silicon Valley when PayPal was getting started. And PayPal's first use case was on eBay, doing transactions on eBay. That's how PayPal really got its roots. And eBay tried to kill PayPal many, many times because they wanted to own that financing function, and PayPal, like, they didn't want a third party to do it. What's interesting is I think the reason why the PayPal Mafia quote is so strong is because so many, like, they were a young company trying to penetrate the eBay marketplace against eBay that was trying everything that they could to keep them off. And it's like that company, it could have failed, and it just like kept getting punched in the face, and they were so gritty. And I remember like seeing their strategies and seeing their tactics and what they did and how creative and gritty they were. And I think that is the biggest reason why, as a result, they have gone on, because in their early days, they had to create a company in such tough conditions. And so I think it's the same thing for all of you who are creating companies now. Yes, it's tough. And you may be thinking, oh, geez, like, I wish it was like it was 2 years ago when I could like just raise money so easily. But what I'm saying is, hey, the good news is you're going to grow up tough, like in terms of your business will grow up tough. And so I hope you look at it that way and know that you can do it.
I love that. I love that from both of you, and such great advice across the board. I want to shift into, we literally have like 4 minutes for Q&A. So if you don't mind, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a rapid fire because I have a number of questions that came.
Okay.
And I'll jump at you with some questions. But some of the questions, you know, one from Sarah that came in is, how do newcomers overcome limitations, you know, when trying to be a solo founder in a new country? And maybe looking at how do you build a network, going to events and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, you know, just a quick question that came in for either of you.
Well, I'll just say quickly, I'm not sure what the issue is. Hey, you're a solo founder, and therefore you really are looking for a co-founder, or whether it's because you're, you know, one person, or whether because you're a newcomer. I would say if you're looking for a co-founder, there are programs. DMZ may have some programs, but I know there are some other programs in the city specifically for single founders who are looking to match co-founders. And then just get out and leverage your network. I mean, if you're part of DMZ, those are great people, and use that and help find out, to get in touch with people.
Yeah, even things like TechTO as well. They host all these different networking events as well, which is always good to meet people there as well. Anything you want to add to that, Amy?
No, I'd echo that, like, being part of communities is a great way to meet people that could potentially be your co-founder. I don't think it's always you know, disadvantage to be a single co-founder. That being said, like, making sure if you do choose a co-founder, you choose wisely, as it's kind of like, you know, it's almost like a relationship and a partnership long-term, that you're happy with that. So you want to make sure that if there's someone brand new to, you know, you've never met before, that you deeply kind of understand what you're getting yourself into.
For sure. For sure. Amy, a quick question for you, actually, is what advice would you give yourself today if you were starting a business in 2022? I don't know. I'm thinking, I'm like, what would I do? What would you do? What would you do if you were starting Peekapak today?
That's a good question. I mean, I think what Janet said, like, this is a time where you need to be gritty. You need to be, quickly showing some of those results. And so I think I would be very mindful of how I spend my time and making sure I get to some of those early kind of traction points. I think that's what we did early on also with Peekapak, but I think, I take advantage of the fact that right now, for example, mental health and well-being are really top of mind concerns. And how do I tap into networks and opportunities that I can really get that validation of, an early concept and be able to grow from there. So I do think it's like thinking about what, at this stage, at this point in the industry or time is going to best help me prove out what I'm doing.
Love it. Love it. Janet, question for you. What's the best way to find out who's writing checks? Is the strategy should be that we ask the investor directly, or should we do our due diligence and ask around, or maybe both?
Yeah, you could do both. You could do diligence, ask around, but also, if you get introduced or if somebody says, I'll introduce you to the company, you could always ask them, right? And I think that, and I can sort of understand this mentality, having been a founder myself. You are so excited to get a meeting with an investor. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I'm actually going to get to talk to this investor. This is super exciting. And you think, oh, success is the number of meetings I have. But it's like, no, actually, success is getting it funded. And every meeting you take, if they're not a fit for you and they can't lead you closer to somebody who is a fit for you, it's a waste of time. I mean, separately, long-term, yes, good to network, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But right now you're focused on raising money. And so, yes, absolutely. It's nothing wrong with, first contact with somebody saying, hey, I don't want to waste your time. It's a good line. When you're actually thinking, I don't want to waste my time, but you're like, I don't want to waste your time. So, this is what we're doing. We're looking for this. Would this be a fit for you? Right. And then, and we're looking to close a round in the next 3 to 6 months. Is this a fit for you or not? And then find that out. And if they say no, say, great, thank you very much. Is there somebody who you would recommend that we speak to? And could you introduce us to those people?
I love it. Thank you so much for that. And look, I'm a big believer that I respect people's time and I like to end on time as well. So there are more questions. Amy, I see that you're typing some stuff away as well. So thank you for that. But let me just take a moment to thank you both for jumping on today and being part of this fireside chat and really giving some awesome nuggets and value and really advice to new founders and even existing founders and even more mature founders to kind of what to do and what to think about next. I want to thank the audience as well for joining us and for submitting great questions. Please expect an email in your inbox in the coming days with a link to the recording of this discussion. And I'm almost positive we're going to post this on our LinkedIn accounts and our social media platforms as well. So keep an eye out and share as you like. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. And again, Janet, Amy, thank you both very, very, very much.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been great. Love participating, and to the entire DMZ team, thank you so much for organizing this and for inviting us to participate.
Yeah, thank you so much for including me. This was a fantastic conversation.
Thank you all. Take care.
Goodbye.